We're waiting for you.
No pressure.
So good evening and welcome to the August 24th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. First on our agenda is approval of the minutes from July the 13th. Is there any discussion, changes on the minutes? Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
All those in favor, do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So tonight, we're doing a public hearing on the proposed housing strategy for the city of Issaquah. I know that the city's been meeting with a lot of groups over the last months to determine where the city should go and how to provide housing for all of the various groups that need housing in Issaquah. So Trish, take it away and give us an update of what we're seeing and what the city's looking at for the housing strategy.
Okay. Tonight, we're going to remind you all of the purpose of the housing strategy and the process on how we got here, which you all know a lot about that since you've been part of it since the beginning. We're going to talk about the mission and problem statements that the Joint Commissions came up with, as well as the 9 strategies that we all came up with. We're going to unpack one of the strategies so you can see how they're sort of how they fall together, and then talk about the next steps, and then open it up to public comment, and then whatever you want to discuss or talk about or whatever, we can do that. If that's okay with you after you've heard from the public, and then we can see how far we can get tonight. The council would love to have this. If they would love for you to recommend it tonight, if that's possible. This is one of the moratorium items that we're hoping to get done, plus some implementation before the end of the year. So I would just start out by letting you know that that's what we're hoping for, but it's totally up to you all. The purpose, as it says in the strategy, is that this is connected to the comprehensive plan in that it's an action plan for the coming 5 years. Hopefully we'll have all of it we'll have all of it started in 2 years, so that by the end of the 5 years, we'll be able to actually monitor to see if things have been built, if things have changed, if we've moved the needle at all. So it's a very fine-tuned action plan. And perhaps at the end of 5 years, we'll pick 9 different strategies because they all worked really well, or maybe we throw out 5 of them and keep 4. So it's sort of this is what we want to do in this intense period, and then we're going to monitor it to see how we did. And again, it's part of the comp plan. It talks a lot about the same things that are policy-based in the comp plan, so they're connected that way. And I love this picture. This is a local picture of Habitat, of us working all on Habitat in the area in Sammamish. The process, you've seen this before and you've been involved in it. We actually started the housing strategy before the moratorium, and that was, we had our first deliverable, if you will, on the existing conditions and the future the same September that the moratorium was established. Then we started the next session. The next step, we worked with you all and the Economic Development Commission and the Human Services Commission as what we called the Joint Commission, and you all worked very hard, 5 different meetings on some really tough pieces of policy and values, and you guys were all very great. There were some tough issues, and all 3 commissions are built a little different and focused a little different, so it was sort of a nice little sliver of the community all in here trying to figure out which way we should go for the future. The third part, based on all the vision and the values and the problem statements you came up with, we figured out how do we, with all that knowledge, how do we launch into the next 5 years to try to change the way our housing is, or get different kinds of housing for diversity and ages and special needs. So that's what the third part is. And now we have a draft of a strategy plan, and then in January, we're hoping to actually launch into the implementation pieces. The first piece, this was based from the September when the consultant helped us find out a lot of data, percentages of all these kinds of things, and it was a very analytical look at what our existing housing is like. And so these are some of the observations that we learned that September. These are in the strategy. And the other part that I found more rewarding, not being analytical by nature, is the focus groups, the joint committee, and the survey results, and what all the values and the stories and the personal accounts. I found these fascinating, and these are also in the housing strategy, but they're two very different places we went for outreach. The data pieces and right out to the focus groups and the people that really are in the weeds on things and really know how things are happening or are not happening. So two very different ways of getting information for us for the housing strategy. The vision that we came up with, we shared this, and this isn't the comp plan vision. It's not the housing element vision. It's not the central plan housing vision. This is what we came up with as because there's so many visions, right? We all have this is the implementation vision. This is how we get out of the gate and actually have things happen. And we had run the original vision that sort of came through the Joint Commission to the council informally at their July meeting, and they thought it needed some oomph. So we went back through all the Joint Commission discussions and things that people said and some of the debates, and we thought we gave it a lot more oomph. So you'll have to let us know if you think it's oomphy enough. It has more oomph and details than the original one by the Joint Commission, but council seemed adamant that they really wanted it to really land a punch. So this is what we came up with. The 3 problem statements stayed the same because those I think are perfect. I might be biased, but I thought you all came up with, I thought you nailed it. And these are, of course, in the strategy, and these are where the strategies come from. And these are the 9. And these, again, it took, I think, 3 different meetings of the Joint Commission to sort of get through them, fine-tune them. And they have been reworded and kind of, because again, we went in July to council, and because they weren't involved, they didn't always understand as clearly as we understood that helped build them what they meant. So we did some fine tuning after we informally shared it with council in July. Did you, yes?
Are these ordered in any particular way?
No, good question. These are just how they came out of the gate. And just to unpack in the strategy, in the housing strategy, and now they each are on a single page because it was confusing to have some more than one on a page. We heard that from several individuals that it would be better to be clear than to save a few pages of paper. But this is how they were organized. The strategy first stating what it is that we want to do, that we're trying to achieve. And then in the middle there, a description of why, what the history is, why do we think it might be a problem, why do we think it could be a solution, sort of what's involved, and then some of the policy issues or considerations that we'll need to go through before we can actually come with an implementation. You know, for ADUs, should they be citywide? Should they not be? Should they still be considered not a duplex, but just as an accessory housing unit, not a full-blown duplex? These are things we haven't discussed yet, we haven't figured out yet, but we know we have to before we bring it back as a set of code amendments. But we wanted to try and sort of throw out all the things that we'd have to think about and council will have to think about before we could make the strategy come true. Sort of so they know what their work plan is, that it's not like, oh, next week you're going to come before us with this. Well, no, it's going to take a little bit of research and figuring out to answer the questions.
So then, just to clarify, maybe from my understanding, so what we're recommending today and then what council hopefully approve next time is that we will say, yes, removing barriers to ADUs is something we want to do.
Yes.
And then there will still be then additional process to figure out
Right.
what does that mean, how do we do it, and then to go do it.
Right,
Okay.
and that's what we're hoping that would happen in the first 2 years of the strategy, is these would all come up and be in some sort of a solution, whether it's a code amendment, something, a program, something, so that
Okay.
we can start monitoring how well we do. Right,
And those discussions will come through us, right?
right, right.
So, quick question as far as the poly issues, policy issues. I like the way this document is written right now. Is there a specific reason why those are addressed as questions?
Another good question. When we first went to council, we wanted them to know how big some of these are and things that they're going to have to consider before they take action. And when those of you that worked on these saw them, you're not the first one that says, why are they in a question? So we've sort of rewritten them now that council has seen them informally to actually have them as statements that we should consider this, this, and this. We should consider if they're all the neighborhoods or just a few neighborhoods, instead of asking them as a question, because it's confusing. You're right, it's confusing.
Why weren't we given that draft? That has
Because it
statements?
just happened 3 days ago.
Okay. Did you find when you were going through, I loved seeing this document, and it's more of what I expected at our first work session from the city. And so I'm curious if you could speak to a little bit about how the city came to these. Did you find that this was drastically different from what you thought when we started this whole project? Was this heavily influenced by
You mean
the
back in
committees? These policy issues, the questions that we have in front of us, or were these things that the city kind of knew was the guiding way? How has this evolved is what I'm questioning, is how has the city really evolved this as we've gone through with public comment and through the commissions?
Well, I'd say out of the 9 that we ended up with, I mean, there were 50 at least that were on the table before we narrowed it to 9, because there's so many that we're doing already. I didn't really know which we'd end up with. I knew probably 3 that we would, maybe 4, but the others just sort of came organically from talking to people, and which ones sort of rose to the priority with the joint group.
Okay.
And through the surveys that we knew that we needed to plug in some pieces. So I don't know if I was surprised. I was pleased at how much input we got from the focus groups and from the survey that maybe showed a different picture than some people are used to seeing with Issaquah. I was real happy with
Do you have
that.
an example of the difference between, like, should the city consider ways to cooperate with other cities versus like the statement? Is it basically, are all questions really in the affirmative? How do we kind of know which way that the staff has gone with saying,
Right.
no,
Well-
we're not going to work with other cities?
Well, we know for a fact that, and this is how we shared it with council, that this ADUs has come up as a solution with other cities. And so we thought, doesn't it make sense that we would work with other cities? We didn't want to just assume that they would, but we thought that they would. And so, yes. Sure. Arthur would like to say something. This is Arthur from Arch.
Right. So I think you've asked, I'm Arthur Sullivan, Program Manager of Arch.
Could you say your name in case the rest of us...
I'm Arthur
don't?
Sullivan, Program Manager of Arch, and I've been assisting you and the joint commissions and the staff. Your first question is, where did we come up with these little policy issues, I think was your first question. And that was sort of the result of, the experience of working on these issues in the past, both city staff and our staff, and we're an extension of your city staff. Listening to looking at the notes from the commission conversations and listening to conversations from the focus groups, et cetera. So we took all that information, and that helped us sort of put these out there. And why we shaped them as questions to start with is when we went to council, we wanted to find out, these are meant to help frame the work as we go into each of the strategies, and they're meant to give a little bit of guidance so that we know what sort of the broad parameters are that might be used as we go into more detail on each of the strategies. So when we went to council originally, we posed them as questions. And they had that meeting, like I say, very recently, and we're now in the process, and it's sort of the same to you. You can still play around with these a little bit. What we're trying to do is, after these 2 conversations between council and the commission, is turn them into statements based on your input. Okay, and we have had the council input, and there's some changing, but not any significant changes from the list that you have in front of you, based on some of their input. But for the most part, they seem to feel like we're in the right ballpark with the policy guidance. That helps.
Thank you.
So is the idea that these questions are all answered now?
No, I wish.
Okay, because I like that there's still set as questions, because I feel like the act of answering these questions is the process we're about ready to embark upon
Right.
over the next year or two. So
Right.
by no means have these questions been answered. These
No.
questions have been identified and fleshed out,
Right,
but by no means have these questions been answered. That's what
Right.
we're going to go and try to tackle
Right.
in the next year or two.
right. And the answers may surprise us. They may give us more questions, which often happens. But at least this was sort of the first way we thought of attacking, because these, they're huge, the strategies, some of them are huge. So it was sort of, how do you start chipping away at the pieces that we can? Because it may turn out to lead into, tiny houses in backyards. It may lead into, it could lead into a lot of things that right today,
For sure,
we're not
yeah.
even thinking about.
I just want to make sure that from a documentation standpoint, is these questions, if you convert these questions into statements, it's still clear that the particular position the statement is taken is a potential policy, not
Right.
necessarily a
It's
committed
still-
one.
And we call them policy considerations, too,
Okay.
because that seemed
Yeah,
not as negative as
as long as
issue.
everyone's still
Right.
clear that these are all proposed as opposed to something that we're endorsing the strategy. We're not necessarily
Right.
endorsing the policies. We're using what you guys have created as our starting board
Right.
to dive into it. Okay.
Right. The actions that are also at the very end talks about the timeline that, as staff, we would figure out at least a timeline and implementation for all of them by April of next year. That doesn't mean they'll all be done, but we'll at least know with a 9 how they all fit into the 2 years. For example, one of them is going on now with a transit-oriented development. We're working on that one now, which is good, because that's one of the 9. And the other one that council's asked us to bring forward is, I think it's number 6, inclusionary zoning in central Issaquah. So that's one that they're hoping to have done with your help, of course, it has to go through you, before the end of the year when the moratorium is lifted. So those would be 2 that would be hopefully on their way by the end of this year, which would make only 987 to do in the next 2 years. So we would just be really, really hitting it. So we'd also figure out, sort of let the council know in that time, what information do we need to find? What are we needing? What's hard to find? What new wrinkles have we figured out? That's sort of what number 2 says is, if there's other things that we need to talk with the council committee, I think it would be services and safety that would help us figure it out. And then we do the code revisions in the next 2 years that you would help with. Hello. And then we would monitor the strategies to see how they're moving the needle, or if there's things that we need to do, or if some things aren't working as well, or if some things are going gangbusters and we want to, put more resources. We would start monitoring that at the end of next year. And then in 2022, we would revisit the whole strategy again and see, do we stick with a 9? Are there 10 more that we want to try? Are there 4 we want to get rid of? That we would revisit it and figure that out depending on our success.
Trish, for number 1, what does this look like on a commission level and with public involvement for developing and implementing these plans? Is there will any more joint commissions be had? Will there be any more public input? Is this only happening at a city staff level? Can you talk a little more about that
Right.
development?
Okay. I think that just the timeline would be figured out by staff, meaning that, for example, inclusionary zoning, we want to have done by the end of the year. We don't know what is all involved in that yet. We've thought about how we could draft it, what kind of math needs to go into it to see how much you can require. Something like that is kind of number-based. We'll probably go out and talk to developers on penciling out and that kind of thing. Maybe the ADU one would be next year, and maybe that would take some neighborhood discussion. I think we would try to put those into the timeline before the timelines are figured out. But I think they would all take different amounts of outreach and input, and depending on the strategy. But I would imagine we would need more input and more, like number 9 is for disabled and seniors and special needs, and I'm sure we'll go back to the focus groups and ask for help on that one, just because they provided so much good information on the strategy itself.
Since we're looking at this kind of 2-year timeframe of really getting ramped up, how has there been any comments from council or any talk on city staff about an extension of the moratorium? Or
No, that's done at the December of
the
this
year,
year.
yeah.
They already
So-
made that decision.
So how does that impact how we are able to, impact really? How are we able to, when we don't really have these strategies in place, how does that really help us to move forward to achieve our goals?
Well, we would hope that if it works, that inclusionary zoning could be adopted by the end of the year, and the transit-oriented development will be on its way. It won't be done by the end of the year. But that would be two that would be in progress
Process.
before it was lifted at the end of December. And then the other ones, we would just have to prioritize, which ones do we think we could get done first? But certainly permits would be, developers could be coming in for permits in January.
Sure. We've talked before about resources for city staff and how we have to prioritize based on what the city has. How does that impact kind of how we're able to move through these timelines?
As far as I know, we've asked for, we've talked about if there's a need for more resources or how we would get through it, and we haven't budget sessioning, budget hasn't started yet for the next year, but there certainly is a lot on our plate already, even just from the moratorium pieces coming over and needing to be tidied up in the code.
Yeah.
But we haven't had that discussion yet, although, of course, everyone knows there's a lot still going on, even after the moratorium's lifted.
Thank you.
Wanted you all to know, you probably already noticed that, but for the public to know that in the appendix, we put the comp plan vision and goals that relate to housing. We thought about putting the whole housing element in there, but didn't know if that was over the top, although it's a fabulous element. We also have the table in the land use element that talks about the housing target and has the most recent count towards the 2031 adopted state target, so that's in there. And C is the Affordable Housing Report Card back from 2015. So we've been working on housing and affordable housing for quite a while. It's just a really tough nut to crack. I think everyone in the region is struggling with it. But I wanted that to be in there just sort of as another baseline of all the work that has gone on already and that we've already been involved in. And that we're still trying to be creative and try new things and try to do the old things in a different way. And so that's why those are all included there. The next steps for the housing. Yes.
I'm just curious, on the appendix that has the housing units, do you guys have anything in terms of new units that are in the pipeline?
Yes.
I was just curious, is that in here, or is that?
No, that wouldn't be a comprehensive plan
Okay.
piece because
Can you ballpark about how many do we have? Because I'm
There's
looking
a
at how many, we have 2,300 to meet the target. How much of that is covered by our current pipeline?
There's a
Is it completely covered?
chart in your strategy on page
13?
Wait for it. 13, yes, you got there before I did. And there's a little line way over on the right, I was going to say the other
So the
right.
dotted line?
It's the line that says 2021 or 2022 housing target reached.
So that housing target is the 2035 target? Or the
31.
2031 target, okay.
And it looks like we would meet it, I sort of put the line sort of in a, because even though they're in the pipeline, you never know when they're
Yeah,
gonna.
some may not get
it's
built,
sort of a-
sure.
It's sort of
Okay.
a, but
I
this was sort of the guess as to how we're growing, how we have grown, and sort of the forecast if we're still going at 8%, what that would be.
Okay. All right, thank you. I was just curious.
Off of that, Tricia, I don't know if you're able to speak to specifically that those units needed to meet our target. If you anticipated those, looking at basically right where we are right now as to patches of open land and usable land, if you foresee those units being mostly in urban villages or if they're going to be in central Issaquah.
We would hope that they'd be in central Issaquah, the lion's share of them. The villages are pretty well spoken for with their entitlement, and so we've always hoped that the lion's share would go in central Issaquah.
Thank you.
The next steps for the housing strategy, which is the piece before you tonight, would be the public hearing tonight, listening to comments, discussing and deliberating, and if you feel comfortable, moving it forward to council, and then they would have their action in September and October. And then your first implementation piece could be coming as early as October 26th for a public hearing, and that would be the requirement. Right now, the urban core of Central Issaquah already requires affordable housing, and this would be modifying that a little bit. We don't know completely what the draft is yet because we've been doing the strategy. And that would let council be able to, that would allow them perhaps to take action on that in December. So there's sort of I wanted to sort of give you a peek that if all goes well, we might have some implementation by the end of the year. Are there questions before we open it up to the public?
I'm sorry, the inclusionary zoning, which strategy is that?
I believe it's 6, require more affordable housing in,
Okay, so the term developer provided,
correct.
that's then in theory, the tool would be inclusionary zoning.
Correct.
Okay.
And that would answer the 6.1. Should
Okay.
the city look to increase inclusionary requirements in Central Issaquah?
Where are you reading that?
Page 21.
Okay, because that language is a bit different than page 17.
6.1.
It's
Oh, you're in 6.1 rather than
6.1 of the
6.
strategy.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you.
Are you ready for the public?
I want to make a couple comments first. First of all, welcome back. We haven't seen you in a month and a half, so we missed you. It's a huge undertaking that the city is planning to do, and I understand that there aren't 50,000 people out there working on this, so it's, I don't like the 2 to 5 year plan, but, things go slowly. The only thing that I'm a little concerned about is all of this growth is supposedly in the central area. And the central area is composed of a lot of it is individual homes. There's not a lot of land that you can just put all of this stuff in that we all need. And it would be nice to have some kind of a vision of, well, this is how much land we have, and this is our vision for what we want it to look like. How do we get all this land in that particular amount of space? To me, that seems like a better idea than just say, I want to implement all these plans. And of course, they're all good. We all want them. I mean, you have good questions, but they all can't happen. There can't be enough workforce housing for everybody. All of this can't happen. And so to me, I would like to see some kind of a plan for, hey, the central area is only so big and it's already full. Where are you going to put all this extra stuff that we really need? So how do you make those plans? The other comment is in strategy 3, you're talking about affordable multifamily projects. And one of the things that the sentence, preservation has included both preserving privately owned, federally subsidized housing that could be converted to market rate housing. I mean, I would be very disappointed if there was federally funded subsidized housing for a family to go in and then live there for 2 years and then be able to get the difference between the value that they got and now it is now at market rate. And so when you're doing plans in there, there has to be a provision in there to limit what you can sell it for, based on something. There was one area in the Highlands that forgot that.
Yeah.
And so, my client bought it at 300, which was great for them, but they sold it for 500, and that just doesn't seem to be reasonable. So, okay, so what I'm going to do is open up the public hearing and to hear what all of you think about the plans. And I know the first person open the public hearing is 7:05, and the first person up to speak tonight is Randy Banneker. Go to and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ms. Prola, and members of the commission. I'm Randy Banneker. I'm here on behalf of the Seattle-King County Realtors. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Our members certainly place a high value on the opportunity to represent buyers and sellers in the city of Issaquah, and we're here because we believe it's in our mutual interest to ensure the quality of this community moving forward. And your work on housing is very much appreciated and extremely important. Ensuring an adequate supply of quality housing relative to demand is both challenging and critical to the health of Issaquah and the greater region. In the draft strategy that staff has presented to you tonight that you've been working on, you have identified the key issues, and you're absolutely on the right track of tackling the questions that are going to be relevant to the challenges Issaquah faces. In our view, the chief focus of the city needs to be on how you will zone to enable new housing supply. Increasing housing supply in response to demand is the only true path to housing affordability. If a family earning the median income can't afford the median price home, a family earning less than that, earning 80% or 30% of that median income, will have an even tougher time affording housing. So I have ticked off, I went through your 9 strategies, and I just wanted to give you a quick flavor and comments on those. Number 1, removing barriers to facilitate more ADUs. Absolutely. This is an extremely important strategy. It does a number of things. Chiefly, it creates affordable rental housing, workforce housing potentially in the city. The rental stream from those ADUs to the owner of the primary residence can help buy down their mortgage. It can help make that mortgage more affordable to them. So it is an affordability strategy there. For seniors, which you talk about later in your strategy, ADUs can be, again, a tool for a little income stream, and it can also have someone on the property who's just there and may be available to help if that person needs some help at some point in time. Strategy 2, approaches to limit and mitigate teardowns. We're concerned about that. It looks good on paper, but I think in practice it's tough to do in a way that gives flexibility for your existing owners to keep their homes current, up-to-date, and relevant to the marketplace. Strategy 3, which seeks out affordable multifamily projects for retention. I think that's a great thing. If the city of Issaquah is wanting to invest in existing multifamily projects, this is a very cost-effective strategy for preservation of what would, I assume, be subsidized or income-qualified units. Identifying additional funding options for affordable housing, we put a qualified yes on that, with the notion that the provision, the development, the funding for affordable housing ought to have a wide catchment. It ought to be regional funding or citywide funding. It ought not to be a very narrow burden that's placed on a builder or the buyer of that new unit. It's a citywide responsibility, and I think it deserves a citywide response. A tool there that you flag is the use of the multifamily tax exemption program. That's a great thing. Keep that in mind. That brings the market incentives into the provision of affordable income qualified units. Strategy 5, you're talking about transit-oriented development. Pursue this one. This is really important. You're going to get increased transit benefits in the city. Transit stations, transit centers is where you should be zoning your densest housing, because again, it gives people flexibility to live in Issaquah without necessarily owning a car full time. because they can access the transit. Strategy 6 is increasing developer-provided affordable housing in central Issaquah. Tread carefully on that. The term, to me, is misleading because developer-provided housing, ultimately, the buyer of that housing is the payer. It's not some magic gift that's coming from the developer. And that buyer is then paying more for that market rate unit, making that unit more expensive as a result of the inclusionary requirement. An added risk of an inclusionary formula that is not done well to market could mean that the project doesn't pencil. It's not economically feasible because of the cost of the inclusionary requirement. And as a result, that project could be delayed, which then delays the production of the needed housing units for the community. You just have to be careful, and it's something that Seattle has implemented through the HALA process, various inclusionary type programs, incentive zoning, things like that, and they're constantly tackling where to set the dials on how much that developer should pay for those privileges. It's tough. Strategy 8 is, Strategy 7, addressing the condominium liability issue. We'd love to work with you on that. That is a huge problem. It is a problem for every jurisdiction in urban King County. It's a statewide problem with the Condominium Act. We need to work together to address that. Condominiums offer the greatest opportunity for affordable ownership housing, for that first, getting in on that first rung of housing. Strategy 8 is incorporating code provisions to increase potential density of housing types. Absolutely. Alternative housing types in the city, smaller housing types, again, are going to offer some affordability that isn't there already, can be done nicely to blend in the community. And then lastly, supporting housing options and services to enable people to stay in their homes or neighborhoods. That's important too, and it's important to identify, quantify who and how many people need help, need that subsidy, identify where those streams of subsidy are going to come and deliver it to them, but make it real and understandable. So I thank you for your attention, and we would love to work with you on all these strategies as they play out.
Randy, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I know you work with the other cities, Kirkland, Bellevue. Are any of those cities doing anything that just pops out as being unbelievably awesome in providing housing for their constituents?
Well, I think you're seeing, this is not in contrast to Issaquah, but the multifamily development, the condo development you're seeing in Bellevue, reflective of a little different market, but Bellevue set its sights on some aggressive zoning allowances, some height allowances, and it took many years, but those are coming to fruition. I don't think you want to be a downtown Bellevue, but I think that's a model. The zone that you set now, the zoning ideas, the concepts, look out 20 years. 20 years is your GMA time frame. Look out 50 years and think about what this city wants to look like and how it can support your developing employment base. That's going to be important too. Kirkland is a good example of looking at how to pivot off of the downtown amenities in terms of multifamily. And I'm talking about market rate housing principally, pivoting off the lake and the downtown. You've got an amazing downtown. There are probably some things you could look at off these central retail blocks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to come to the microphone and introduce yourself, please?
My name is Karen Tennyson, and I don't live in Issaquah. I just moved to Redmond, but I was on the Kirkland Planning Commission for 8 years, and I've been involved with Imagine Housing and the Housing Alliance for providing affordable housing. And when I was on the Planning Commission in Kirkland, we undertook a number of things. One was ADUs. Another was a small lot strategy for people who'd lived in their home for a long time but had a huge lot, and allowing them to subdivide to have a smaller lot with a smaller FAR for it. And we also did a lot of innovative housing. Redmond I like because they have inclusionary housing, and I will tell you that you cannot incentivize affordable housing enough to get anyone to build it, a regular developer. You have to make it inclusionary, and then it happens. So, thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? Elizabeth?
Elizabeth Maupin, Human Services Commission. One of the things that strikes me is that as you're doing some more research in how to get what you need, it would be really helpful if Issaquah had a day center for our residents who are either homeless or on the edge. This would be an opportunity for us to find out what the obstacles are to their being housed in Issaquah, what changes really need to be made to have that population housed. And we can look at the subsidized housing that we already have, the affordable housing projects, and send people out. Maybe we could have a cadre of volunteers who go out and both interview the management and the residents and find out what best practices there are that make for affordable housing that people really want to live in, so that all of our residents are living in housing that's not only affordable to them, but appreciated by them. I think this will strengthen our community. We have to find ways. We're so far behind on the affordable housing. I think that needs to be a particular priority, and we need to find a way to integrate it in a way that allows people of diverse income levels to know and understand each other and to really live joyously in this community. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Hi, Steve Pereira. So several thoughts as I looked through this or read the discussion. Remove barriers or processing costs for ADUs. I'm not sure that that's a good thing that benefits making affordable housing happen. It just makes it lower cost than other housing, but it's not really per se affordable housing by other standards. I'm just concerned with kind of losing the idea of this 60%, 80%, 100%, 120% cost ratio. Strategy 2, so one of the things, it seems when I heard about the Issaquah Highlands, it seems like there was a requirement for a 30% affordable housing stock, and I'd like to see that concept, that idea of having a minimum affordable stock of housing for the Central Issaquah plan for new development that goes in for housing. I don't think that was policy 2 per se. Another thought that occurs to me is that when we talk about what's currently the affordable stock kind of product of the Old Town neighborhood area, I would like to see the city council has currently indicated or extended the moratorium to December of this year. I'd like to see that extended for at least for the downtown area for the moratorium to continue to maintain or keep that affordable stock of housing. I'd like to see the PPC make a recommendation to extend the moratorium for the Old Town neighborhood area so that we don't lose any more of that existing stock while that moratorium is in place, because as soon as it goes away, then you can submit a permit, and that gives you vested rights to tear down or eliminate that existing small stock of housing. I agree with the idea. I would like to see, one of the things that talked about is a fund for the city of Issaquah for, I guess, basically raise taxes or revenue to have affordable housing. That's kind of a strategy goal on how we go about that doing and how we raise funds and how much funds we could manage. But I do think that needs to be part of the discussion as far as a solution. Thanks.
And I'm Mary Lynch, live at 2690 Northwest Oakcrest Drive, Issaquah, Washington. And I just want to say thank you for, I think there's a lot of work has been done and a lot of meetings held. And I think we've, as addressed earlier, the points have all been addressed. Now's the time for making sure that it does get implemented and the codes get written correctly around that, because our history in doing that has not been really good, especially when it comes to the central area plan. So my concern is, kind of with what Steve was saying, is we need this for the central area plan, and to raise the moratorium before some of this stuff is done, I'm a little bit concerned, because one of the reasons why we had the moratorium is we weren't getting what we wanted. And I really think, since we're close to our numbers on what we need in 2030, that to rush ahead and lift the moratorium without some of these things in place, I think is jumping the gun, because we need to make sure we do it right going forward, because we're not going to have a lot of land to redo it, available. And as Steve said, especially in Old Town, I know I've talked to a lot of those people down there, and they live in the smaller, older houses, and they're just, don't know what to do, because they've lived there, they've had views that are now blocked, they've had, land that's now, their neighbors are, basically almost zero lot line with what's been allowed to happen in 3- and 4-story tall buildings next to, older family homes. So even if they wanted to age in place, the quality of life has gone down. And so I think some of the things we need to look at, especially with Old Town, is some zoning that will look at what really should be there, and do we want to keep the character of what's in Old Town, or do we want to just blow it up and do something different? So whatever we do going forward, if we want to keep some of the stuff in Old Town, we need to make sure that we have the codes in place to control that. The other thing I want to say is the 90%, is that my buzzer? Okay. So, the other thing I want to say is it talks about a $90,000 median income. And the thing that I really want to concern you is, over the past 5 to 6 years, I know of more people that have had to move south and out of Issaquah that are still working here and doing the lower paid jobs, the service jobs, but they couldn't afford the rent, so they've moved further south. And I think that when you're looking at 90% or 90K, most of your workforce here is lower service industry. You've got some executives with Costco, and you've got some that's left with Microsoft. But you've really looked at the workforce here. You've got teachers, you've got firemen, you've got school bus drivers, you've got service people who are not at that 90%, even with 2 incomes. So you really need to look at, I think, look at that as being lower, and how do we get our workforce back into Issaquah? If we get our workforce back into Issaquah, that'll help the traffic a lot. So I think that the schedule, I would like to see it sooner than later, but if we can't get it done sooner, I really think we need to talk to the city council and saying we need to hold off on the moratorium, or to prolong that until we get it right, so we can control our growth. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak?
Hello, my name is Peggy Foster. I live at 2254 Newport Way Northwest. I'm also a realtor, and I agree with a lot of the things Randy said. With regard to the strategy one, I'm curious, do most homeowners even know that they have the ability to build an ADU? Because I didn't realize that it was a possibility. And what is the city doing to educate people so that they can do these things? And is there an incentive for homeowners to build ADUs, to take on that kind of project? And then on strategy two, I believe that the city should get involved to the extent that the neighborhood retains its present character. I think that that's so important. That's why a lot of us live here, because of the character of this area. I think there should be allowances and incentives to create multifamily homes like a duplex or a triplex. And I think demolitions should be considered only when the property is beyond reasonable repair or remodel. In other words, don't tear down a perfectly good home just to replace it with a larger, newer model. I think on strategy three, about local resources, I think that this is a great opportunity, especially in creating co-housing. This is a model that would appeal especially to senior homeowners who don't want to leave their home. They want to stay there. And yet they'd have the benefit of having another family or another person living on the property. So I think Randy was right on target with that. And that would be a great opportunity for shared equity, allowing another party to buy in on an existing home instead of renting. As far as number 7, mitigating deterrence to condo construction, I would love to see a requirement for the inclusion of mixed-use space. I think that was discussed once upon a time in the central area, central Issaquah plan, and I'd love to see that incorporated. And then on number 8, what about code provisions for allowing existing homes to, so this is my question, what about a code provision that allows existing homes to be retrofitted to be like a duplex or a triplex, again, keeping with the character of the neighborhood? And that would be a fantastic opportunity for co-housing. And I appreciate you letting me make these comments. And some of my observations, every day we hear something in the news about our housing crisis, right? Every day. Even in Bremerton, I heard this on KNKX yesterday. So people that work in Seattle are moving to Bremerton because of the affordability. And with that fast ferry, that's going to make it even more desirable. But the people that live in Bremerton are now having to compete for the lower, the more affordable homes. So that's not really working. I guess we all know from that article in the Puget Sound Business Journal that Seattle is the 9th fastest growing metro in the nation, gaining, 1,100 residents per week. That's a crazy number. So what this tells me, it's time for a paradigm shift in the housing market. And one idea that I think is worth mentioning is urban co-housing. With intentional planning and use of space, we could retrofit existing properties to accommodate more families. This would essentially be attractive to seniors wanting to age in place and millennials that want to stay within the city limits. Of course, it's going to take some forward-thinking individuals to create some alternative housing solutions that people will buy into. And we see it's already happening, and companies like CoBuy are helping to facilitate this. So if we look at what Uber has done for local transportation and what Airbnb has done for hotel accommodations, can you imagine what co-housing might do for our demand here? So I appreciate you listening. Thanks.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak tonight? Is there anyone else who would like to speak tonight? Seeing none, I will call the public hearing closed at 7:29. I'll open up to you first. Do you guys have any additional comments or questions, answers?
I do have a concern as we are looking at some of these questions about creating incentives for development. I do not believe that we should have or allow for incentives on new high-density development. I think we need to mandate that. If we create an incentive for it, then we're not allowing capitalism to work. Right? So if we need to create a framework that says this is a requirement. And I don't believe that we should be incentivizing those kinds of requirements. They should be baked in. Two, another reason why I do not believe we should be increasing the incentives is because that means we're going to have to increase our taxes. I do not believe that we should increase property tax to fund incentives for affordable housing, because what that does is if we have seniors that are living in their homes now that are on fixed incomes and we raise property tax, we're making that investment for them less affordable. So those are my concerns.
Anybody else?
Trish, I was curious, how does the city feel like these strategies are really addressing the increase in homeless populations that we've seen in our community? Specifically, we had numbers for the single-day census that was taken regarding homeless children in our school district. When we think about strategies, we discussed about housing specifically targeted to single mothers. We talked about a variety of different housing styles that aren't necessarily traditional to be able to accommodate families, to be able to kind of pick themselves up and kind of help them through being at those lower income brackets. I'm not seeing any strategies that really address that segment of the population.
Right, that would be number 9. Talks about homeless and transition, and again, we don't know how that will work because we haven't dug in to find out all the different options, all the different partners. We just know that it's an issue. We haven't figured out how to solve it yet. It's still a strategy.
Right.
Sure.
Arthur Sullivan again, Program Manager of ARCH. So Trish is correct that number 9 specifically calls out homelessness, but you'll also see, when you get to homelessness, and Council Member Silverstein pointed this out when we were talking with them, is that when you get into the arena of homelessness, you're not dealing about just housing, you're dealing with a lot of service issues as well often. So there's an overlap between the whole human services efforts, which the city is involved in, as well as housing. And this plan is more about the housing component, but number 9 gets at understanding the complexity of homelessness and the combination of both a housing and a services component. And so that's where that will be explored more. But this isn't something that's new to the city. And as Elizabeth Mopin pointed out, she's been involved with efforts locally. You have done some things, the community has done some things in response in the past to homelessness. And then the strategy about funding. The city has been funding affordable housing for years, and they have supported a wide range of homeless housing through their funding programs. It has changed and evolved over time, and we continue to work on that. A number of I'd say we're to a point that almost 20% of the resources spent by the cities on affordable housing are spent on housing specifically targeted to homeless households, be it individuals or families. And it changes over time based on the work of human service agencies and local agencies. So the homeless issue has one that's been getting a lot of attention, especially the last 10 years. And the cities basically in housing have been using their housing funds. So a number of the developments in your community that have been supported with affordable housing dollars include housing units specifically for households who are formerly homeless. The city did make a piece of land. One of the other strategies is about surplus land. The city did work with what's their name, the local group? Compassion House, to help them. The city donated a house and they moved it over to a property that was donated to them. And so that's a local organization. Many of the new larger developments, the YWCA Family Village, some of those units are targeted for households who were formerly homeless. So there are a wide range of ways and strategies that homelessness has been addressed on the capital side as well as on the services side. And so those 3 different strategies, though, are places in which the homeless issue has been touched in the past, and we assume will continue to be touched as you go forward.
I think that's what upsets me, is because we see that that has not actually made the impact that we need in our community. And so I would have liked to have, while I appreciate it being called out, but I assumed it was going to be called out. It's something we've discussed quite a bit. I wish there was something slightly more concrete, whether that's we're working with these particular organizations, of which there are many in Seattle, something that is a little bit more concrete of saying this is the progress of where we're moving right now. For some of these issues, it feels a little bit open and vague to me. And while I realize we have this time frame of looking at it, specifically regarding strategy number 9, I really think that there could be something that's a little more concrete about where the city would like to move forward to be doing a better job.
So if I could respond to that.
Please.
As with the other strategies where we're saying at this point, until you get in depth in each strategy, it can be challenging to do that. I think one of the things we can potentially do, and maybe, I want to try to test this with you, is homelessness is being addressed on a more regional level now. It doesn't mean local actions aren't happening, but the resources are trying to coordinate so that there's an overall system that is trying to be more effective. So there's different approaches to homelessness than were used 5 to 10 years ago. Some of the buildings we used to have were called transitional housing. They've been converted to permanent housing for homeless. We're doing things called rapid rehousing, and it's being done through a collective effort in which city staffs and electeds are involved, agencies are involved, and maybe something that could be acknowledged here is, in the report here, given the, this is sort of the first cut level, is that homelessness, we will look hard at the efforts being coordinated through All Home at the county level to help shape local policies and moving forward to increase our efforts. Maybe something like that?
I would appreciate that, yeah.
Okay.
So one of the ways that affordable housing is being funded is through a slight charge that everybody pays when you sell a house. When you record a deed, there is a small fee that goes along to that. So there are many avenues that is bringing money in for affordable housing, not for homelessness, but affordable housing. I do want to just kind of say something about ADUs. When you're in a city like Bellevue, which is spread out and doesn't have a area that they have to contain all of their development in, or Bellevue, Kirkland area where there's areas where there's big lots where you can build on ADUs, we're looking at this, say, the central area, and there are very small lots, and they're ramblers. And to try to make them into ADU units, you're going to have to build onto them, and I don't know how many can be supported in the downtown area. It would be nice if it was a lot more land that associated with this, but it's not. And I certainly don't think that it's really fair to raise taxes on everybody in order to support affordable housing. We need to find a way to do that. Is there anything else that is good for the order?
Just a quick, I guess, more of a statement than anything. I appreciate the comments about the moratorium coming to an end, and we're going to work on this for the next 2 years. And meanwhile, permits can start coming in, and so I think the question is we kind of like walk and chew gum at the same time, So maybe I would just ask, and I'm not really sure if there's flexibility to do this because of staff time and everything, but maybe we just sort of, if we could make not even a recommendation to council, but just a sort of a commitment that if we could prioritize in the strategies that we look at first, those that are going to influence what's coming in after the moratorium is lifted. In other words, so I'm thinking like 4, 6, 7, and 8 are the kind of things that could influence the kinds of things that are built, whereas the others are more about retention of character and things, which are all important, but I guess that's just a sort of a statement or maybe a consideration for staff as we prioritize these over the next 2 years.
I'll echo that. Trish, it seems like the staff kind of has a rough idea of the order in which you want to tackle these and what needs to be done before the moratorium versus after. It just seems like as you've talked through it, so maybe since I think the 1 through 9 is currently arbitrary.
Yes.
It might be helpful to maybe sort those chronologically, not necessarily saying number one's most important, but that might be the one that, just from a tactical standpoint, we'll be tackling first. I don't know if that would be helpful, because when you read it, you kind of just assume one is first.
Right, and
Some
you
sense
all
or
can
another?
certainly recommend which order to do them, but with staff resources, we only know the first two that are out of the gate this year. We don't-
Maybe that just means then I'm suggesting those become 1 and 2, just to make that more clear
Okay.
that that's what we're going to tackle first. And maybe if the difference between 5 and 8, there is no difference, and that's fine. But maybe just pull up those 2. I think it's helpful because when you're looking at it numbered 1 through 9, it's just helpful to be like, okay, 1 and 2, that's what we're going to be tackling
okay.
first out of the gate. I think that might be helpful.
Okay,
I think it's really important to do the codes.
yeah,
I mean, that's how we got into trouble with some of the buildings that did go up, is because we didn't have a code that said, no, you can't do that. So I'm afraid that 2 years' time, there's going to be a lot that happens that is going to take away from the character of our city. So one more.
Is it helpful to remind them that aside from this strategy, there's a number of... I think to your comments, that these are the affordable housing strategies you're looking at, and the 2 that have been identified that are most linked to the moratorium are the ones that are in the, are about the zoning and the incentives, and as well as the TOD project, because those are most related, that once you lift, it will then affect the development. You can speak to this better than I can. There's several other things related to codes for Central Issaquah that are also being worked on now,
Right.
that will be part of getting done as part of the moratorium, correct?
right.
And that
But
might be helpful.
I would correct us and say the 9 are the whole housing strategy, not just affordable.
Right, they're the whole housing strategy.
The 2,
right.
though, the 2 that are going through first are 2 of the affordable ones, though.
Right, that are most
Right.
related. But there's other actions that the council has requested be completed as part of the moratorium outside the housing, these 9 things that you see here.
Right, and you are working on most of them, vertical
Right.
mixed
So
use.
you're familiar with those, right?
The architectural and urban design, which your public hearing is on next week. Parking, you already finished, hurrah. I'm missing somebody.
Isn't it the mixed use?
Right, that was the first one.
All of those issues go into it. I'm still
Right.
I'm still concerned
The
that
vision,
that
that's it.
codes are not there
Right.
to prohibit some things that maybe we as a community don't want in our community.
Right.
I agree. I found one of the most interesting things about this process so far to me was poring over the raw census data. I love being able to actually see how our community is changing. I think it's easy to think of Issaquah in older terms, and I liked looking and seeing how 30% of our population is single individuals, and yet we have a huge glut of big standalone multi-bedroom housing in our community. And so it concerns me that the moratorium is going to be lifted prior to trying to put in these safeguards to say, no, we're not getting the housing that we wanted, and yet we don't have something in place to be able to ensure that, and specifically regarding the types of units that we're going to be getting. So I share concerns about kind of how this is getting laid out, and while I don't expect us to have answers today and so immediately, I do want to see more of a correlation between how are we trying to actually get what we want. Right now we have a great document about guiding principles, but actually that next step of getting to the code amendments I think are really critical right now.
So it sounds like, and this is for us here, the next step that we should probably think about doing is putting a recommendation to City Council that these strategies, these 9 strategies, don't get baked out so much in the phase period of time, but we actually we put resources towards
Is your mic on?
we put resources towards actually getting these things knocked out in time for the moratorium before it's lifted? Is that what I'm hearing from you, all of you?
No, I think we need to work with them and all do deliberate speed. And I think there's some that are they're specifically the one that's very moratorium dependent, that's the developer incentives. I don't think we want to link this with the moratorium. I think we need to be working on both of these as fast as the volunteers and staff can, but I don't think formally linking them is necessary, would accomplish anything.
I actually think there's requirements that are being imposed on the council in the way of county or state where you have to do certain things in certain orders and only have certain times to do a moratorium. So I think that's one of the things they're coming up at. And so I would love to see a moratorium continue, but I don't think that the council has the authority based on all these other things in order to do that.
Okay.
Right, they already made their, they already said that it will be lifted the end of December.
Right.
They already voted on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think in the spirit of helping everyone move forward, I think should we move to recommend the 9 strategies as they stand?
I have one quick question for Trish. How many languages is this document available in right now on the city website? How many languages is this document available on the city website right now? Is it solely in English right now?
Yeah, that's not my purview, but I think our website, I don't know that our website translates things yet.
Okay.
That would be a good question, though.
Something that we discussed in our work sessions was talking about how to kind of really bring the community together and have as much outreach as possible. And so while affordable housing isn't necessarily the venue to be talking about how we come together as a community, I would encourage city staff to see about how we can arrange resources to make this progression with the city more available to all residents within our community.
Okay, AJ, what were you going to do?
Yes, can I move to have the commission recommend that these 9, that we endorse these 9 strategies and that they should go to council?
I have a second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 And so is that in the whole strat, the whole? Okay,
The whole thing just as the way it is.
okay. So you didn't want to prioritize them or,
No,
okay.
I don't, you know.
I think from a presentation standpoint, it would be helpful, but that was more of a suggestion rather than like a formal recommendation.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
you know, at least some of our thoughts that what things are most important. But it also depends on what the city has the facilities and the,
Right.
The bandwidth
to be able to address in what order they're going to come in. So we understand that. And so I'm just hoping that things like code amendments and, you know, the basics come in there before you start planning everything else, because you can make all these plans, and if the codes aren't in place, then anybody can come in and do whatever they want, even though you want to go this way, they're going to go this way.
Right.
So, you know, that's just, I think we've talked about it a
Yeah.
lot, so.
At this point,
that's
Trish, I
what-
feel like we've tried to communicate to staff how we feel about, but what we're looking at right now is a little bit limited. It's hard to be like, yep, all done, leave it to you.
Right.
And so since
Right.
this is trying in the spirit of saying that this is, you know, forward momentum, we want to not necessarily tie our hands as us saying this is where we feel is the most important way to allocate resources. I think you guys know that better. But
Okay.
while still, I think we've communicated to you tonight that this is a start and we need to keep that momentum going.
Okay. But it sounds like you agreed with AJ to at least change the numbers on the 2 that we're trying to get done now? Was that? Or
I think he's saying
are you
that's more
just
from a
leaving it the same?
presentation standpoint. You've already clarified what those 2 things are that you're initially working on
Right.
for ADU,
Okay.
so that's,
Yeah.
That's
we're
enough?
basing
Okay.
that off what you've told us, rather than
Okay.
what we see as a priority.
Okay.
Is that correct, AJ?
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
I
Okay.
am worried about the amount of time that you're saying that this is going to take to actually implement. We've got
2
development.
years?
Yeah, well, yes,
That
because
seems
we've
quick.
got developments going in now, and if the moratorium,
Meet every week.
then those are going to be not applicable to this document, and this document is actually really important. So what can we do to accelerate that process? Give you more resources to get this type of thing done? Because we
You
don't.
could get involved in the budget process, make a recommendation that these be funded in the next 2 years, or something to, you know, that there's enough resources to do the work that's laid out.
How about if we semi-make a recommendation to council, just saying that we, as a committee, consider this extremely important and would like the council to consider doing extra man-hours to accomplish what we think is important for the future of the community.
I'll second that.
Yes? And it doesn't have to be a formal letter, but I'm assuming that Trish, when she presents this
Put it in the agenda,
that she adds this to the presentation.
Great.
Like someone had mentioned, once you build it,
It's
once the
there.
land's gone, it's there.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Right,
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Sure. Do you have an extra letter from?
Since we're helping Trish with the work on this, I just wanted to sort of clarify a point or two from what I just heard, so we can make sure we get it. So what I think I've heard is you've had a lot of comments, and we will, in the staff memo to council, try to incorporate in as comments, if not part of the formal motion, some of the things you said tonight. And one of the things I thought I was hearing you just say in different ways, so I just want to make sure if we're hearing this right, is that some of the strategies are linked to code, and that if you were to have your druthers in trying to sort of help filter, the ones that relate to code might be the ones that are most important of the 9 to work on sooner than later, because the code is the core of what cities do and how they manage what happens.
And then I think more specifically, we're currently changing the code as part of other moratorium
Right.
work streams, and so it makes sense to do that
Right.
concurrently.
But some of the strategies are kind of have code related.
I understand
and
they meld
some of them
together.
don't. Some of them are money, which is not code. Some of them's encouraging state legislation, which is not city code. So that's kind of where I'm saying, I'm trying to see if I'm hearing that part as one thing to consider is when they're looking at that full list, if it's code related. And those are the ones that often need the most community conversation, too, to get through, because whatever opinion there is here, there's probably another opinion there that everybody has to sort through, and you guys will be helping do that. But I think that's what I wanted to see if I was hearing correctly, is the ones that have code-related items, think hard about trying to get going sooner than later.
Yeah, and I think, and if this requires a lot of work, then don't worry about it. But I think what might be helpful is to have a little table that takes all the recommended policies. You don't need to restate them, but just have 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, or whatever, and then be like, does this require change to code? And then just like a yes, no, just to help identify which ones are code dependent, which ones are not.
Right, and some of them we don't.
Just to help navigate it.
Right, and some of them we don't know until we actually dig in to see how to change it, is if it's a code or not.
Okay, so well, yeah, so it kind of be like a yes, no, maybe.
Trish, we just want it done
I know, I do
now.
too, truly. I do
Okay, if
too.
that's why I phrased it that way. If that to figure that out would actually be doing the deep dive on the issue, then don't
Right,
worry
I
about
think
it. We
some
can
of
tackle that
them
when
mention
the time
code
comes.
amendments, or some of them mention more specifically, so those would be, obvious, like ADUs, but, and
sure.
inclusionary, but some of them, like condominium, I don't know how that would turn out if we were able to get the state legislature. I don't know if we'd have to change the code.
ADUs, your testimony was, people need to know they can do it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay,
That's
no,
encouragement.
I'll retract that suggestion. I think we'll learn that as we
Okay.
dive deep into each one of
There's
these.
going to be a lot of discussion on all of this.
Actually, as you said that, what we have done for some cities is we will have something that will have like two or three columns. And it'll say if it's fiscal, regulatory, or communications or community outreach.
I think
And
that
you
would
may
be
be
great.
checking more than one box for some of the strategies. And we maybe could do something like that here.
I think that would be great. I think helping us understand what because basically what you've done with the sub bullets is you've have a bunch a bunch of proposed levers to pull, and then classifying those levers. Is it a fiscal lever? Is it a code lever? Is it a combination of the two? I think that would just help people just navigate it a little bit easier.
And I think also going after the smaller, faster, actionable items, maybe concurrently to one big tasks that we have to deal with on this that might take a lot of time, but just start knocking out things that are easy and fast and for staff to be able to work on with the current resources while we're trying to get other additional resources.
Right, we've started some of the ADU piece just because we know the code and we know where some of the problems are. So we've started that one. I don't know when it will come, but we've started that one already.
Yeah.
But yeah, because that's an easier one because we know sort of what we're doing on that
Yeah,
one.
if there's
But
a
some
bunch of
them-
those, you know,
Some
you
of them
get,
we just don't quite even know how to dive in because they're pretty big.
yeah, you get maybe 5 or 6 small things done and while you're still working on one big concurrent project.
Very optimistic. I'm glad you have faith
We're
in
going to
us.
tell the council that you need more people to help you do this.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So with that, what is our next meeting? What's the next step?
Next week, a week from today, 2 public hearings. One is on architectural review and urban design manual that is a tool that the Development Commission would be using for development review in Central Issaquah. They've been having meetings so that whatever it is that comes to you all is what the Development Commission feels they need to do a better job in reviewing projects in Central Issaquah. So that's next week.
Is that a PPC meeting?
Public hearing, yeah.
Just
And
PPC?
we're going to get feedback. I believe the packet is being worked on as we speak by magic, even though I'm sitting here. It will have a memo coming from the Development Commission letting you know how they've reviewed, at least that's what I'm being told, is how they've reviewed the draft as it's moved through, how they use it, how they feel it will help them do a better job at reviewing future projects coming through Central. And the other public hearing, that's the first one. The other, yeah.
Just on that, can I ask that little memo also briefly explain like what the triggers are
It's
for
already
that?
been written. I mean, the
Okay.
packet is going out like in moments. We're working on it back at the office where I will be heading directly
Oh,
after
okay.
this.
Never mind
yeah,
then.
I think they've already sent it to us. We're just madly packaging it as I sit here and they sit back there. They're probably going, get out of there, Trish. But I said, no, I'm going to stick it out. But the other one, which I think you guys are going to love, the other public hearing, is another one on urban schools. And this one, from your work with parking and your work with some of the other moratorium items, we realized as urban schools went forward, that it would make sense that if we're requiring structured parking for some other required parking for offices and residential, why wouldn't we require that for a part of the required parking for schools? Because that would just help to not have big surface parking lots. So that one's coming back to you with just that little part, not the whole urban schools
On
amendment.
what date?
Next Thursday as well.
No. There's one meeting next Thursday, and then the following meeting is,
Oh, there's 2 hearings at one meeting.
There's 2 hearings and 1 meeting.
okay.
The next meeting after that is September 14th, which is your annual comp plan public hearing on the 2017 comp plan amendments.
Okay.
Hello. There aren't that many this year, which is good for the public hearing because we've been busy with so many other things. There's very few comp plan amendments.
Okay, that list is in the packet, right? Or are you
That-
reading it
your
off?
It's on the
schedule is
last
on the
page.
last
Okay,
page.
so you guys know.
We got it.
Okay.
Right, and I can't remember how many of you have RSVP'd for next week, but
I don't think
no,
it is.
that's not the one that you're missing. You're missing the big trifecta one.
I'm not missing one until
The end of
October.
September, the end of September, right?
No, I'll be
28th?
here. I'll be here.
You're going to be here for the trifecta? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Because that's a huge one on the 28th.
Okay. That's next week,
No, September 28th.
September 28th.
Okay, I thought that was, you had already
It's
sent
just
it a
gone
note.
crazy.
I know,
Okay.
this has been the craziest year I've ever had with
This is gonna be a
PPC.
big one.
Okay, so without any other input, I'm going to call the meeting to an end at 7:59.
Wow.
Oh.
Good work, you all.
I don't know if you need.